All right, so I want to call this meeting to order and welcome everybody to the September 19th, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Sustainability Commission. This is our first meeting with our full body, and I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Again, do want to apologize for being late. I know everybody's time is valuable, so I want to make these meetings as efficient as possible. Before we get going and talk about what our mission is here and what we hope to accomplish over the next several months, I do want to go around the room and just have everybody introduce themselves to everyone. So, Ms. Fox, would you like to start?
Sure, why not? Hi, my name is Lindsay Fox, and I'm a resident of Grafton who used to be a 1099 employee for the town. And I just thought this would be a nice volunteer opportunity to participate and serve the community.
Thank you very much.
I'm Mark Haddad. I'm on the Finance Committee, and I'm one of the two Finance Committee reps on this committee.
Barry Smith, 36 years in Grafton. I'm on the Finance Committee, and I've had fun at Data General, acquired by EMC, recruited to a company named Candle, acquired by IBM. And then I jumped to a company named Acme Packet, acquired by Oracle. So if you want to hire me, just be ready to get acquired for big bucks. There you go.
I'm Laura DiDio, 20-year Grafton resident. I've been a reporter. I'm a high-tech industry analyst. I have my own business, ITIC. I've also worked for a number of companies that have been acquired, and I cover companies like Oracle, EMC now. I am on the Board of Elections, and I was looking to volunteer for Grafton to get involved in community activities, and I thought this would be a good opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here. My name is Ed Prisby. I am the current chair of the Grafton Select Board, and I have been a town resident for 9 years now, something like that. Yeah, around about that.
My name is Martin Jahn. I've been in a Grafton resident for about 3 years now. My wife actually saw the post on Facebook, and she thought that might be a good one to volunteer. So I did, and I guess the rest is history. Thought it's a good opportunity to meet new folks from Grafton, because we're really not that well connected yet, other than moms groups and stuff. So it's good.
Thank you.
I'm Amy Marr. I'm serving my first year of my first term on the school committee. In addition to this committee, I'm also on the CIPC bylaw committee, which is presenting at town meeting next month. I am the clerk, and I'm really excited to be getting started tonight. This is great.
Angie Correa. I've been here for 15 years in Grafton. I was doing budget analyst work when I was working at Bentley back before I had kids, and then took a bunch of time off after having them. And last year I went back to doing accounting as taxes. So when I saw the post, I just thought, budgeting, that's what I do. I can help. Decided to volunteer.
Well, thank you for being here. We still are waiting for one more. She's going to be here after there's a school open houses are going all week long, so that'll happen then. So the reason why we instituted the Grafton Sustainability Commission really goes back quite a few years to the institution of Proposition 2.5. As you probably all know and all realize, Grafton's income is limited by state law to increases of 2.5 plus new growth every single year. And what that means is we can increase our overall tax collections, the amount of money that we bring into town every year, by 2.5%, plus what's called new growth. And we'll get into the definition of that later.
Plus debt exclusion.
What's that?
Plus debt exclusion.
Plus debt exclusion. So what that does is it creates an upward governor or a ceiling on how much money that we can bring in every year. Back in 2014, we passed our first ever Proposition 2.5 override, which means the town got together and voted, and according to state law decided, okay, we realize that our income or our ability to bring in new money is limited by Proposition 2.5, But we're willing to make an exception this time. And we did so to the tune of, what, $3.5 million annually. So having done that in 2014, we instituted roughly the same level of services that we enjoyed prior to that, but now have come to a point where we realize, well, the override money that we raised back in 2014 has come to an end. What now? All right. And it is an anomaly, and not just for us, but for communities around Massachusetts. We went in this town 34 years without having to need a Proposition 2.5 override. And now, some 5.5, 6 years later, we're contemplating it again. And although there is no official proposal for a Proposition 2.5 override out there, it has been discussed. So the question for us and for our community is, what do we do? How do we handle maintaining services at a time where the income that we are used to is no longer able to sustain us going forward with the level of services that we're used to? We cobbled together this group to really answer that question and to define the choices that are facing Grafton going forward over the next decade or so. And the question before us really is, can Grafton be sustainable under its current model? We are 9 strong, and what we want to do over the course of the next 9 months or so is to begin to answer that question. So in order to get there are a number of different facets of the question that we have to break down. First, how different are we than other similarly situated communities? Are we spending more than other communities are on similar services? Are we generating a similar amount of income as other communities are who are similarly situated with the same types of property value and the same per capita income? Are we relying too much on residential property taxes and not enough on other revenue sources? Or are we just fine where we are? Do we spend more on personnel than other communities do? Do we spend less on personnel than other communities do who are looking for the same level of service outcome? We don't know the answers to these questions. So one of the first things that I think we need to do is create a benchmarking report to determine where we are and who we are comparing ourselves to. Then, let's break down costs and income. What are our cost drivers? Now, when we develop a budget for the town, we do almost 2 separate processes. We do a school side budget that the school committee works with the superintendent to come up with. They determine the level of service they want to provide. They determine how many employees they need. They determine what their fixed costs are, what their optional costs are, and they determine what the program is and figure out how much that's going to cost. Townside does largely the same thing. Townside decides what their fixed costs are for personnel, what their optional costs are for non-union personnel, comes up with a budget every single year. And then, on the flip side of that, we have income. What are our income options? We have taxes, we have fees. That's basically the long and the short of it. And then on top of that, we have the variable, which is, how do we manage it all? How do we communicate together? How are we operating efficiently? How are we operating inefficiently? And how are we challenging ourselves to be innovative and do it a little bit better than maybe it had been done in the past when you could rely on enough income to make ends meet? Clearly something is amiss, because you don't go 34 years without one override and then find yourself in the same spot 6 years later without something having changed. What I've heard a lot of is, well, back when, we would get in a room and we would figure it out. Well, now here we are. We're in a room.
This is the room where we're.
This is the room.
Where it happens.
And we're gonna figure it out. So, my proposal so far, is to adopt a model that I experienced in a community that I lived in 10 years ago in Newton. We did the same exact thing that we're proposing here. In Newton, they had passed an override in 2002. They found themselves out of the override money in 2008. And rather predictably, everybody said, well, where did the money go? And the town said, well, it went to all the places you told us to send it. Maybe the question isn't where did the money go, but why it went there. And what choices can we make differently going forward? The town instituted what was called the Newton Citizens Advisory Group. And the Citizens Advisory Group, the first thing that they did was they developed a benchmarking report. And the benchmarking report went through all the towns that Newton wanted to compare itself to decide who was doing it better, who was doing it worse. Are we doing well? Because how do you know in a vacuum? So I'm going to hand out to you all, 1, 2, 3, the executive summary of the Newton Citizens Advisory Group report. There you go. The first thing that I want to do is organize the benchmarking portion of this. But actually, before we get into that, I also want to outline where I see the other subcommittees going. I would propose, and I will entertain a motion in a couple minutes, to establish several different working groups for this committee. The first is going to be a benchmarking group, and my suggestion will be that everybody is going to be a part of the benchmarking group. Okay, there's enough work here to go around. The second subgroup that I want to implement is a subcommittee on capital structure. The third is going to be on school cost structure. The fourth will be on municipal cost structure. The fifth will be on revenue. And then the sixth and final should be on what I'm calling decision and control structure, which is, again, how are we operating efficiently? How are we innovating? What are the personnel and sometimes personality obstacles that keep us from working efficiently together and defining goals moving forward? So that part of it, I'm actually going to leave to last, because I think that there's a lot of overlap with that sort of thing. I feel like, you know, once we move through revenue on the municipal side, or revenue in the town side, and then cost on the school and municipal sides, respectively, we're going to answer a lot of the questions that we might have otherwise had.
And all these subgroups are gonna tie back to the benchmarking that we do with the other communities?
So that is a good question. The answer is yes and no. I want to do the benchmarking first as a whole. Once we're done with that, we're going to answer a lot of the questions that the subgroups would have. So for instance, how can you define the revenue work plan without knowing what an appropriate fee structure is, for example? You can't do it without doing the benchmarking report first. So I think the group of us working on the benchmarking is going to help each subgroup define, okay, well, now we've got this data about, you know, what other communities and towns like us do for fees, for instance, or for pay-as-you-throw trash, or for Proposition 2.5 overrides, teacher salaries, police salaries, municipal employee salaries, how many principals do you have in a high school, things like that. I'm sorry to interrupt, do you have an idea in your mind how many communities we should use? Thank you for asking me that question. I do.
It's as if we planned this conversation.
It is.
Which we didn't.
Just for the record.
Tim sent me the comps for who the Department of Revenue has defined who this town is going to be compared to. Some of it is regional, but also some of it is based on population, demographics, and gross median income.
Are those the towns we're gonna use, or are we gonna try to?
So those are part of the towns that we're going to use. Amy also pointed out that the Department of Education has us compared to different communities.
Yes, we are working on that.
Okay.
As you know, I had said I would reach out to Tracy, I'm going to get her last name, Novick. She is in the midst of a school committee race of her own.
She is, yes.
And she is heavily covering the bus saga in Worcester right now. So she's got us on her radar. She's going to get back to me, but she hasn't gotten back to me yet. But that is a list that we should use. We should see what the Department of Secondary, or not secondary, Department of Education for the Commonwealth, how do they compare us?
There might be some overlap.
There will be some overlap, and she and I had a conversation about that. She said there's definitely going to be some overlap, but you're going to have like one or two districts that you're compared to that are not going to be on the municipal side. So that'll be an interesting, kind of, why is that? And, you know, what are the parameters that DESI uses that the Department of Revenue does not, for example, or vice versa?
The schools have been, in the last couple of years, they've been presenting comparative information, and they have a list of, our schools have, they have a list of school towns.
Yeah.
And this is especially per pupil costs, which we're famously low. Reimbursements from the state, which we are significantly low. But there's a couple of reports that Dan Gale has.
Yeah.
I have, but Lord only knows where. So those things
Yeah.
they have and they use right now.
Dan and I talked about it. We want to get an updated list.
I got you.
So our district has a list that started from that list, but
Yep.
it may have gone off a little bit. You know, we do compare ourselves with districts regionally that really, we have very little in common with other than they're our neighbors.
Well, that's
Yeah.
one of the challenges that I did want to point out, that we do compare ourselves to communities like Westboro, Shrewsbury, Northborough. It tends to go east. It tends to go east and it tends to go north. And the further north and east you go, the higher sometimes the level of services, also higher sometimes the salary is for municipal employees. 80% of our budget is municipal salaries. And that's to say nothing of, well, actually, I'm not sure if that includes healthcare or not. I think it does.
80% is usually employee expenses.
Employee
salary
expenses, so
benefits.
all salary and benefits.
I imagine the school has a similar.
Right. Which leaves very little room for capital, and it leaves very, very little room for programming increasing. So if you are chasing the expectations that are set by another community, the fair question is, should you be doing that? And what are the expectations set by another community? What are their demographics? What are their ability to pay? For instance, let's say for the sake of argument that one of our municipal unions was saying, well, the union in Shrewsbury gets paid, 25% more than we do on average. A fair question would be like, oh, okay, well, what is Shrewsbury's ability to pay? And is Shrewsbury itself running in deficit such that they will not be able to afford what they're paying their employees on a yearly basis just in a few years? And if that's the case, then is that a goal that we want to chase? Or do we frame the issue another way, which is to say, okay, here is a level of service that we want to provide, and we are going to peg our expectations on that level of service. Come hell or high water, right? Some communities do that, and that's perfectly fine. And that's, if you are looking to define the choices facing your community, what we want to be able to ask the community is, no, hey, listen, if you are looking for that level of service, this is what it's going to cost. Or you can make the argument that based on our demographics and our income, we can afford a different level of service. Maybe it's a little bit lower, or as some might argue, maybe it's a little bit higher. Maybe we could be doing better based on our demographics. So that is, I think, one of the goals of the benchmarking report is to define where we are and who we are, not just based on what we want, but by who we compare ourselves to. So Tim had just pointed out to me that our sister communities are given to me on page 26 of the budget,
Yes, in the budget book.
in the budget book. But I don't see it. And that's what I get for running late today, because I didn't get to look that up ahead of time. So here's what I would like to do. I will look that up when I get out of here, and then Amy, if you could get us the Department of Education information on who the towns are that we're being compared to for the Department of Education. And then let's talk about who colloquially we would like to discuss in terms of benchmarking, in terms of setting ourselves up for what are we comparing ourselves to regionally. I would suggest that were we to gather data and information, that Shrewsbury and Westboro ought to be in the conversation, as well as Upton and
And what was the last one?
Northbridge,
Northbridge,
No.
Millbury.
They're
Yeah.
broke.
Millburn.
One interesting thing, as we're doing this, in contextually with the benchmarking, are we going to include, say, for the last 10 to 15 years, the growth of those communities versus ours? Because if we look, one of the things that's happened, and you point out, in the last 34 years, there were no overrides.
Right.
But in the last 20 years, if you go, you look at the real estate boom, okay, Grafton doubled in population from 8,000 to, 18,000. Then it leveled off a bit. And then if so we have to put in context how those the communities, the surrounding communities also grew.
Yeah.
There's saturation in Shrewsbury, Westboro, but if you look at Uxbridge and Upton, and even Sutton, there was more, it's still more rural, there was more controlled growth. And then I think we have to look contextually at where we might be going or in the next 10 years. Okay, and because this is a sustainability
That's right.
thing, and
Right.
how we're going to project that and, and pay for it.
So I think that there's probably no data point that should be off the table. I think that when you include population growth, absolutely, we should be looking at population growth as well as revenue growth and current expenditures to the extent that we can. So one of the challenges of the benchmarking report is what I would like to do is assign to people particular communities to delve into. And we're going to have to call up the administrations of these various communities and say, this is the data that we're looking for. Do you either have it online or is there somebody in your administration that we can talk to? So I would propose dividing it up this way. If you take the Department of Education towns, and then you take the DOR towns, and then you take the, what I'm phrasing is the colloquial towns, the towns that you're just ordinarily compared to. We can divide it up in those sets, and then you're going to call up the administrations of these towns and say, okay, I'm looking for this year's budget book. And in fact, do you have the budget books for 2017, 16, 15, 14? In fact, what do you have for data going backwards on population growth, demographic growth, income growth, and expenses. Big picture items like that. So before I start dividing up assignments on the particulars of who's calling whom, I would actually like to hear a little bit more about what data that we think is relevant that we want to go ahead and collect.
I think I found what you're looking for.
Go ahead.
I have it. Oh, I thought I found it before you did.
Page 30.
Mhm. Oh, okay.
Ashland, Bellingham, Grafton, Holliston,
I have a
Northbridge,
different
Shrewsbury,
list.
Sutton, and Uxbridge.
I have a different list.
You found a
Page
different
30,
list?
Grafton, Ashland, Northbridge, Shrewsbury, Sutton, Holliston.
Oh, then how come I have Ashland, Bellingham, Grafton, Holliston, Northbridge, Shrewsbury, Sutton, and Uxbridge?
This is, okay, so what I'm looking at, hello? Is
Hey.
it a table of the tax rates,
I'm on page 32. What page are you on?
30.
I think you guys just read the same list,
Now,
but
what
in different
document
order.
is this?
Couple more added.
Okay.
Oh, I'm on
There was
page
like-
32
I
of the
think
budget
you
book, and I don't
had
see
the
any
town
table at
budget
all.
book?
What year are you in?
Okay.
It's on,
2020.
Oh, I'm
last
in
couple of years are
2019.
on,
Oh, that's why.
the town website,
So in the 2019 budget, on page 30,
school and municipal.
It's Ashland, Bellingham.
Ashland, Northbridge, Shrewsbury, Sutton, Holliston.
All right, in 2020, he has Ashland,
Oh,
Bellingham,
I see what he did.
Grafton, Holliston, Northbridge, Shrewsbury, Sutton, Uxbridge.
So Northborough and Uxbridge and Auburn are listed on the graph below the table, but the data's not in the table.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I remember that. There was a reason for that, and I'm not sure it was a good one.
I mean, he presents,
I
he
cast no
presents the tax valuation for the single-family tax bill, but then the chart of reported income has more communities in it.
Right, but when you're
Yes.
talking tax bill, that's personal, like property taxes, right?
Right.
Yes.
So in these communities like Shrewsbury and Westboro that have a lot of business, that's
Right.
gonna be skewed.
So this
Absolutely,
is, this
100%
is, this is
correct.
the issue. The question, one of the difficult questions that we're going to have to tackle is, who exactly is our peer?
Yeah,
What are
it's
we
not
going
Westboro.
for here? It's
I
not
don't
Westboro,
think.
it's
It's not
not
It's
Shrewsbury
not
either.
Shrewsbury.
It's not, and it's not even going to be Millbury, because Millbury's got 146 running through it, right? We're looking for other communities who are, I would say, fewer than 20,000 people, who have median family incomes of less than $100,000, and who don't have vibrant business districts
Right.
running right through them. And that's incredibly difficult to find. You believe it or not, you know what I mean? It's either you sort of got the North Bridges out there,
Right.
which we're not really comparable to, at least in terms of goals, or you've got your Westboroughs and your Millburys and your Shrewsburys that have major commercial districts in them that are supplementing that income. So it's very difficult to do. The DOR has, so the towns that he has listed there have been told to us by the Department of Revenue as these are the communities that we're comparing you to for a bunch of different reasons. The Department of Education has a different set of communities that they're comparing us to, which is kind of a problem. Because when you go to pay your tax bill, you don't write a check for school side, town side, you just write a check. And at the end of the day, we here need to decide, okay, are we comparing how we pay our police and our janitors and our staff to Ashland? And meanwhile, the school department is comparing how we pay teachers to another community that's very different from Ashland. What's our market? You know, what is our market in terms of how we compensate people? I won't even get into how crazy it is when you really think about, well, okay, our, our municipal employees paid really in the same open market way that private sector employees are, which probably not. But all we can do when we go back to the community, I think, is say, okay, again, we are either raising your taxes or not, or we are providing this level of service or another, and how we inform ourselves is based on how much we think you all can afford, and based on what everybody else is doing, this is reasonable. Or if it's not reasonable based on what Ashland, Bellingham, Northbridge, Uxbridge are doing, then we've got another goal for you, which is a higher level of service that we think you're going to enjoy and we think is going to be worth it for you, and here are the following reasons. But before we get there, we need to define, who we are relative to other communities. So I'll give you, for instance, if we're running out of levy capacity, the ability to tax, should we be instituting fees? Right? Or where are our fees relative to other communities? How are we paying for individual services in a way that's fair to the community? And a great way to answer that question is like, well, what are our fees and what do other people charge? Well, we charge $60 a month for the summer for the beach. Okay, who else has a beach? And what are they charging? Or we pay, Amy, what do we pay for parking for kids?
$200
$200 a year
at the high school.
for parking.
And it's interesting you bring that up because the school committee is actually going to look at fees, I believe, not the next meeting, but the meeting after. We're revisiting fees. We're going to conduct a comprehensive so we'll do some of that work already.
Right.
Looking
You
around. at
charge
other
200 to park and 200 to take the bus.
Yeah, grade 7 through 12.
225 to
It's,
take the bus.
They went up?
It was 225 this year.
it was 200 if you paid by May
Oh, did
31st.
I
Oh, that's right, I paid after July 4th.
Pay a late fee if you pay
Never
after a
mind.
certain.
That's why
yeah.
it was 225.
But the parking spaces, which start
We're
with
grade 7 through
seniors,
12?
are 200.
Are you guaranteed to get a spot?
You are not.
So
And
you
that's
pay
an
200,
interesting-
you don't have a guarantee for a spot?
Well, if you pay the fee, you're guaranteed a spot
Oh, okay.
by the nature of the fact that we're not going to sell spots we don't have. So they went out and they counted, and they only allowed students to sign up for that number of spots. Now, you might say, well, why don't we number the spots, and then everybody's guaranteed their spot? All it takes is one kid parking in the wrong
right.
spot, and it messes it all up. And every district we contacted about that said, don't do it. Don't put numbers in, it's a huge headache. Just let them figure it out. And they do a fine job. So this year, we let it go to seniors first, and then we had a lottery for the juniors. And that's,
Seniors are guaranteed, juniors.
seniors get first crack. I'm not gonna say they're guaranteed, because there's X number of spaces and Y number of seniors, and Y might be bigger than X. My daughter's class year is gonna be an example of that. If everybody gets their license and is ready to go senior year, we will not have spots for every senior in 2022.
What's the population in the high school?
I believe right now it's just shy of 900. Last year we were over 900, but we had a big class leave and a smaller class come in.
So they're about like 225, 250 a class?
Yeah, the biggest one is 264, 265 now. Ainsley's class is the biggest. So the sophomores, 2022 is the biggest class we've ever had.
Wow.
And what's the population of the middle school?
That's a really good question. I could find out the answer for you in a minute.
I think that,
Total school population is running over 3,000.
yeah,
We are, I think, in the top quarter of the state in K through 12 population, including charters.
Last year it was 835 in the building.
although the bubble was that sophomore class. After the sophomore class, it does start to level
Yeah.
in a downward direction. So there's no, outside of those kids, there's no urgent population expense bubble that we're
So that
facing.
includes that's all the schools in Grafton.
Right, right.
Except, this is part of the whole exercise. As the town builds out more and more residential, the schools tend to say, well, every house is gonna be 1.5 kids,
Yep.
Right.
and that's gonna be 13 years of that kid. Unless, my joke is, he's really tall, and then he's gonna leave and go to St. John's. That's where all the tall kids
But he
go.
might come back if he doesn't make the team, just
Well,
saying.
there, yes, that happens, yes, yes.
But that is a concern, and there's nothing that the school department can do about that. We
No.
get the students we get, and we have to serve them no matter what. So if that means, 10 years from now, we're adding on to a school, or we're putting up trailers again, which we've done in the past, that's what we have to do. There's nothing that says you can't build because your schools can't hold these kids.
Right.
There's no protection in place there.
That, to your point, looking at what I call the trajectory, or the numbers going up, going down, like that, is of value. It's not the ultimate value, but at least it gives you a picture. It can contribute to the overall picture of where are we going.
The best that we could do is inform people where we're going. You know, I remind people all the time, we can't control that. You know, we're not in the business of social engineering. We're not in the business of telling people, okay, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna limit our lot sizes and, you know, we're going to, you know, forego building apartments. You know, there's a reason why property values have increased across Massachusetts, and there's a reason why, you know, I say it all the time, that it is becoming less affordable for families to be able to live in the Northeast. And it is because we artificially control the production of housing. All that we can do as a committee is to be able to tell people, this is where we're going based on the data. You know, this is what we see coming through the pipeline. This is what we see in terms of our projected expense. And these are the decisions that you're going to have to make based on the data that's in front of you. And just to that point, I want to talk about maybe the end result of this report. We're not looking to make decisions for anybody.
Nope.
You know, we are an advisory board looking to define the questions that people are going to be faced with, and people should talk about and should debate going forward about what sort of community this is going to be. And once we've done that, we've done our job. And the best thing that I think we can do years from now is to be able to look back on this and say, yeah, we informed the community about where it was, about who it was, and asked it what it was going to be. And based on the information that we gave it, it made a decision. And that decision turned out hopefully wonderfully for everybody involved. Because one of the things that I really do love about this community is that it does take care of its own, and it is prideful. It has a sense of it, a sense of itself, and it does enjoy taking care of not only its own, my family, but other people that it cares about, and will provide for those people going forward, I believe. So if we can define those questions going forward, fantastic. So just to talk about how I can make life easier for us. The really great thing about what Newton did was it wrote everything down and provided a roadmap for anyone else who ever wanted to do this. And as other people who are in the municipal policy-making business have told me, do not hesitate to plagiarize. You know, everybody.
There's no such thing as plagiarism.
There is no such thing as plagiarism in municipal government. Oh, it really is. So if you turn to page 8 of the executive summary that I've given to you, here are the key questions defined on the city town benchmarking report. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Here you go.
Is this the whole?
No, just do the whole thing. I just give it the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
First up, allocation decisions. Whether done in an explicit and transparent fashion or not, Newton has set priorities as reflected by its allocation decision. So Newton was asking himself, how does it allocate resources? Why are some resources allocated to the police department and less to fire, as the fire department frequently claimed? Why are certain resources more frequently allocated to the school department, as we've heard here all the time? We frequently hear that X percentage of the town budget is allocated to the school department, and we have that fight all the time. So how are we allocating resources? That's a data point that we need to tackle. Compensation strategy. This was a huge one for Newton, and as far as I know, we don't have a compensation strategy. Their compensation strategy was that their goal was to pay their educators within the top 5 communities in Massachusetts. That was the stated goal going into it. It obviously, over the course of the new century, became quickly unsustainable, but that was their goal. I'm not sure that we have one outside of we would like to avoid paying the lowest 5 communities in per pupil expense. That seems to be our strategy, but it's a de facto one. Do we have one? Do we need one? Do we want one? What is our compensation strategy? Do we have any compensation policies? School benchmarking. Again, overall level of investment and investment in class sizes and teachers. What is our strategy there? Do we have one? Are we making it up as we go? That would be good to know. Comparison communities, we've already talked about that. City and town benchmarking. Development, this is a fantastic one. The town of Grafton doesn't have a long-term plan that has been updated since 2001. We are certainly a different community than we were back in 2001. What is our overall development strategy? We have one, I think, piecemeal. We've got a development strategy for Route 30. We've got a development strategy somewhat for South Grafton. We've got a de facto strategy that has a lot of money being pushed towards Grafton Center for legitimate reasons. What is our overall development long-term strategy? I think Joe Layden has a good handle on this, but I think some conversation with Joe is warranted. Our taxation strategy,
On the development, is this what are we referring to, the town plan?
yes, the town plan, right. And again, in keeping this in terms of benchmarking, where are we with commercial development relative to other communities? Where are we with residential development relative to other communities? How are we doing with planning relative to other communities? That part I think is going to be a difficult question to ask. Whoever forms the subcommittee on municipal benchmarking will have to have a further conversation about that. Taxes. I can't even tell you. I was at, what's that nice Italian restaurant in Westboro?
Arturo's.
Arturo's. I was at Arturo's briefly recently. I sat down at the bar. Somebody recognized me. We got into a conversation about taxes, like within a sip of my drink. The entire bar turned to us, and they were all listening, and everybody had a story about how terrible their taxes were and how they wanted to move from the community that they were living in. Some lived in Grafton, some lived in Westboro, some lived in Northboro. Everybody wanted to move based on their taxes. And what I found comical about that was, number one, nobody ever said, yeah, I actually live in a really nice community that provided an education for my family, and I got something out of it. But number two, everybody wanted to move to everybody else's town.
Grass is always greener.
Grass is always greener. Apparently, there is a community out there that pays for everything and doesn't tax anybody, and their property values are still amazingly high. I want to find that community. So,
And their schools must be excellent.
Here's the most important question of that discussion. Did you finish your drink?
I did. I actually finished two. But I say this in a flippant way, and I don't mean to, by all means, I don't want to dismiss the concern, but I want to validate it if I can. Where are we in terms of taxation? Are we fair or unfair in terms of what comparable communities are providing? If we are too high, then it's beholden on us to make recommendations as to how to remedy that problem.
Yeah, but the problem looking at average tax bills, and I think, Angie, you touched on it earlier, is some towns have a higher commercial base.
Right.
They can spread it. They split the tax rate, which we don't do. We have a single tax rate.
That's right.
So average tax bill is a very dangerous thing to benchmark.
But this is the interesting part, and I want to break that down. So when we do benchmarking, I want to explain to the reader, okay, here are Ashland, Bellingham, Northbridge, Uxbridge. Okay, this is what DUR compares us to. What, do they have a split tax rate? What is their tax rate? What is the level of service that they provide? How are they being ranked in terms of, educational outcomes, for instance, okay? And do they have a commercial tax base that is comparable to ours?
That's the
And
key.
if they do not, we need to say that. And if they don't, and if their tax rate is lower, or the average tax bill is lower, or their burden on the taxpayer is somehow lower, what's their debt service, for instance, even getting into that. If the burden on the taxpayer is lower, I want to know why. Why is it lower? What are they doing differently than we're doing to lower the burden on their taxpayers? And if the answer to that is uncomfortable, then so be it, it's uncomfortable. But if the answer is very simple, which is, well, they just have more commercial revenue than we do, and all we can do is rezone and encourage business to move here, then that's the answer too. Then that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, because when you look at the property value, the property value actually determines what the tax rate is, because you raise $20 million, say that's your levy limit, is 20 million, your town is worth $1 billion, you're gonna have a very low tax rate. If you have a $20 million budget and your town is only worth 500 million, you are gonna have an astronomically high tax
I
rate.
suspect you're going to be on the subcommittee, and I'll do you one better.
How did I get into that?
But there's another way to look at this also, okay? In a very simplified way. Now, obviously, when you're talking about fiscal and finance, you can't put that aside. But looking at what just an outside observer sees. I moved to town in 2001 at the height of the real estate boom. So observing that, now my taxes went from $4,600 a year to almost $8,000 now. But put into context, what has happened since then with my tax dollars? I have seen 2 new schools put in. I have seen the size of the police force probably triple, okay, with a lot more police equipment. The fire department probably triple in size. I've seen a lot more traffic lights put in, roads. So the infrastructure, okay, and the services have also risen commensurately. Now, Amy was doing the Grafton Complaints. You were one of the moderators on the Grafton Complaints
She was the chief complainer.
on Facebook.
Big complainer.
Okay, now I'm from Queens, New York, originally.
Respect.
Okay, and I was an investigative reporter, CNN, Channel 5 News, The Village Voice, and I used to sit there and laugh at what people here were complaining about. But I could see the improvements. So just in the services that we're getting, and people are complaining about trash bags, and sometimes people forget to, but you could see the improvements.
So you're happy with where even though your tax bill doubled in 20 years, you've seen improvements in the overall service delivery?
Well, not only that, if I call, I had to call, if I call the police or the fire department,
They show up.
they show up. And I've had things happen where there was a slap-happy person who knocked over my mailbox several times after the storms, and I stormed up here to this building and said, hey, and they said, we don't pay for that. I said, oh, you're gonna pay for it because I have it on videotape, he knocked it over and then he put it in my driveway, which was illegal. But that's another story. But you have somebody to complain to and you get results, which doesn't happen. Now, am I happy that the taxes doubled? No, but I can see where it goes. So aside from what you're saying about split tax bill, et cetera, I can see it. And as a citizen and a taxpayer, it's my responsibility. I know, no matter where I live, that my tax base is tied to the schools. Now, what I would say, and this is something that we're going to be wrestling with, and why I'm saying, what about the context with the schools? Grafton lost 500 residents, okay? Most of them older people who can no longer afford the taxes. And this is something that everybody grapples with. I'm a single career person. I never had any kids go through the schools. So what happens when you have retirees? They can't, and folks, if you have more kids coming into the schools, should the retirees or should single people who don't have any kids in the schools, should they be paying the same tax rate as people who have 2, 3, 4, and probably not out here, 5 kids going through the schools? So if there's going to be a shortfall, And if you're looking at the predictability and you're going to, and you're looking at laying off teachers or things like this, that's something that might have to be on the table. It's not going to be popular.
Well, there's going to be, I think there's going to be any number of solutions on the table. I think one of the things that we do, and this is again part of the benchmarking, is we provide relief for people who are on fixed incomes and who are above a certain age from their tax bill, should they apply for it. If the question becomes, should that be higher, then, that solution could be on the table. I would suggest to you it might be as much a political solution as a financial one. I think that you're going to get any number of people who are parents to say, well, okay, you never had any kids go through the school system, but you did. And, you obviously benefit from having an educated populace around you, and your property value benefits from having, a solid foundation for schools. It's, here again, this is going to be one of those data points about benchmarking in terms of educational outcomes. Where are the schools ranked in Grafton versus where are our property values ranked? And I do know, as somebody who's lived in a bunch of different places and was looking for homes and who's done this data for 10 years now, if you look at median home value in Massachusetts and compare that map, and the DOR has these maps, with the map of educational excellence in Massachusetts, it's one and the same. They're the same map. Communities, Lexington, Concord, Weston, all those communities, and we can get. I don't want to get into the sociological argument of what happened first, the home value or the educational outcome. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be, it's a chicken and eggs.
Right, but what
scenario.
we do know is property value in this community is tied directly to educational outcome. And beyond benchmarking, I think what the school subcommittee is going to get into is, look, our school department's expenses have risen on average, I would say 5.25, but it was a little bit less for 1 year. But it's been 5.25 since 2014. We are now at a point where we can no longer do that. So, as the town administrator has sometimes pointed out, if the school department's spending increase only at a rate of 4%, we wouldn't need another override until 2025. Can you live on 4%? Why and why not? That's going to be the challenge of the school department subcommittee cost structure report. But for benchmarking, here's another good question. Other communities that we're compared to for the purposes of the Department of Education, what do their budgets increase by and why? And we might not get the why. We might just get the basic value is.
That's going to be the biggest part of the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have sustainable education. I mean, you cannot sacrifice the education, okay? So then you're going to have to drive revenue. And nobody wants to really cut services, but there's always fat somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be the challenge.
So what is the breakdown, school versus municipal, in the budget?
That was 56,
Barry?
57.
57?
So Barry's got an interesting thought on this. So it's a difficult question to say. It's 57% to 42%. However, there is some money that we only get for education from the state,
Okay.
right? And we wouldn't get that money but for education, and that money is obviously it's baked into the budget.
It's the biggest part of your state aid.
It's the biggest part of our state aid by a lot too. It's not just a little
10
bit.
times.
Although Tim would counter with that and say, well, when you count school budget versus town budget, you're not counting healthcare costs either, because
Nor
healthcare,
are you counting capital.
nor are you counting capital. That is true too. So shorthand, 60-40.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
And is there any crossover? So do we think that revenue total is more important than whether the town has business, as far as like looking at this for a town?
So
Because
no,
like tax bill doesn't seem like the way to go,
It isn't.
right.
because you can't, because then the businesses mess that up.
So-
So like overall revenue,
Mhm.
collected for the town? Is that what we're looking at for
So that's,
At everything.
that's part of, we're looking at everything.
No,
So-
but I mean to grab towns, like to figure out what towns we're gonna use.
Right, no, so the towns that we're gonna use are gonna be provided to us by DOR, but that's what they look at.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from, so
So we're
the,
just going with their list, or are we gonna
We're
try to
go-
find crossover with the school list? 'Cause
We're-
that seems
we're gonna
like-
do both.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do both, and what I'll be interested to find out is what the delta is between the DOR list and DOE list.
Right.
You know, why? So why is DOR saying we're compared to Ashland, but the Department of Education is saying, no, you're compared to Auburn? Why? You know, what's the difference there? And even if, you know, maybe we'll never figure that out, but at the end of the day, I think we have to answer to people who expect us to be comparable to those towns to say, okay, here's what those towns are doing in terms of education spending. But remember, we don't have the same income that those towns do. One of the things I will tell you that the town administrator is looking at is overall value, an overall ability to pay based on property value and based on income. That's another data point that we're gonna wanna collect for benchmarking.
We're not gonna come out with, as you said earlier, with a perfect Venn diagram
Nope.
where we align
It's
with any
impossible.
one town.
That's right.
However, there are going to be points of intersection where we line up maybe with Auburn in this
That's right.
sector and with Ashland in this sector, because all of these towns at various points had different growth spurts
That's
and
exactly right.
development. And then they had different points where, I wouldn't say stagnated as such, but where they were fallow.
That's
say.
right.
Okay, and then they grew again.
That's
Like,
right.
for instance, Shrewsbury is at a saturation point in terms of, what they can do physically
Yep,
in growing.
yep. That's exactly,
Put
that
every
is,
piece
you,
of thing that
you,
do on Route 9. Here,
Yes.
build
you've hit the nail on the head. That's why it is so incredibly difficult for us to be able to map a path forward without doing this exercise, but also in doing this exercise, realize the limitations of it. So at the end of the day, all we can do is say, okay, we're sort of similar to these other communities in these particular respects, and here's what everybody else is doing. Ashland, they don't do a whole lot of fees, but they don't need to because they've got this commercial district. Or this other town, Bellingham, does a lot of fees and they need to, but because they've got a senior population that's growing and it's fair for them to put the fees on the service users. And at the end of the day, if you can say that to people, you can say, well, look, let's decide whether or not Grafton has a lot of service users and a lot of other people who can't be burdened with taxes, and let's put the fees where they need to be. But in saying that also, is $225 a lot for parking for a year? It seems like it, and it's not just the parking, right, too, it's, whatever other fees you have to pay as a parent that end up being thousands of dollars on top of the tax bill that you're already paying.
Yeah.
So, there's a continuum of decisions here. You pull this lever, you get this result, you pull another one, you get another result. All we can do is, again, provide the data to people. So just to quickly run through these points, other data points, free cash, how are we doing for free cash in terms of other sources? And I'm going to star this and I'm going to come back to it in a second. Pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. Pilots aren't huge for us. We only have a few institutions that are going to pay pilots. We have an agreement already with Tufts for the next 10 years on what they're going to pay. It'll be interesting, I think, to
Is there
gather
anybody
data.
besides Tufts that pays a pilot?
I don't think so. I can't think of anybody else.
Can't think of any other big nonprofit.
Yeah, I can't either. Total expenditures, school expenditures, we just covered that. Police, we have 20,000 people strong. Do we have enough police? To your point, there's a lot of new equipment. How are we doing there? Fire department, huge. We already have a fire department study going on. And let me just say to the people watching this, worried that we're going to meddle in that, we're not. No, they've got a whole committee doing that. I think we should communicate with them and base our recommendations off what they find. Fire, police salaries, same thing. Public works, general government. Here again, I got in this argument this past spring, we were giving 10% raises to people, and what I heard in return was, well, that's pennies compared to what we're giving to people on the school side. Well,
I
okay.
want to avoid this committee from ever getting involved in a us versus them. municipal
Yeah,
versus school.
I do, absolutely do not want to do that. Money's money. When I write a check for my taxes, I don't care where it goes, well, I care where it goes, but it's not split up like that, you know? You have to be able to have a sound policy on what salary structure is, and what I hear in return is, well, then people are gonna leave. Okay, I'm not saying they should, I'm saying if that's a trade-off, we need to articulate that that's a reality and somehow substantively validate that reality. Is that just people threatening to leave, or are people actually going to leave? And we'll know that based on what other people are paying
So,
their staff.
just to be clear, what is covered under general government? Because you've got municipal salaries on number 8, so what is covered under general government?
So general government, I'll give you for instance, what the school side does and does well is they zero-base their budget so that every department head is required to justify every spend at the beginning of each fiscal year, as opposed to taking what they got last year and either adding or subtracting a percentage depending on what they were told. Are we doing that well? Are we justifying our spend would be my general government. So for each department head, are you justifying your spend, for instance? Cultural, recreation, human services, you know, how do we compare to other communities? That's gonna be a difficult one. Again, we've got a beach, we like it, we do well with it. How should we be doing that sort of thing differently? Library is gonna be in there too. Municipal salaries, we sort of already covered, on health insurance contribution. How are we, this is so huge. How are we doing relative to other communities on this, and why are we doing what we're doing? And Mark, you can probably speak to this too. I know that demographics plays a lot into what your health insurance contribution is and who you can get to insure you, whether it is the state system, or whether or not you're going out for.
Well, we're very lucky in Groton, we're part of a 21 municipal organization called the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group. So we're able to control it, but we just went through a huge thing with our unions where we increased the cost share from 80-20 to 70-30. And that was a
Wow.
big fight. But for at least 1 year, we were able to level fund our health insurance budget, which avoided the need of an override.
Right.
That's only a 1-year fix.
Right.
Because you're gonna grow again the next year, and you're right back where you start.
That's right.
It's an important fix because you're lowering the amount of the increase, but it's still increasing. So it depends on where you are. I know we just got out of the state, and now we insure directly with Harvard now.
Yep.
Is that how we do it? Which was you save some money, but that, again, that's a 1-year fix. I can't wait to see what the budget's gonna be for FY '21.
Yeah, so we were in was it the Commonwealth Insurance Group? Is that what the CIG?
GIC.
GIC, Group Insurance Commission, for, I think it was 4 or 5 years that we did that. And at the time that we did that, what we were able to do is we were able to pool our contribution with other communities through the state, and there was a trick to it where it was good for, again, certain demographics, but bad for others. And what we ended up finding out was after a few years of lower rates, it steadily ended up climbing back up to 5, 6, 7% annual increases. It wasn't at the 12 that it was 10 years ago, but it was still more than we can afford. So how are we doing on that, and could we do
And all of
better?
a sudden, the state decided to switch plans and went from Blue Cross Blue Shield to Fred's Insurance.
Right.
And it caused a big rift, and they had to go back to Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Right.
So,
Capital assets and debt. This is another huge one. You can't tell me you need an operational override without telling me what your capital assets are. How are we managing our capital relative, again, to other communities? We have the CIPC in charge of, well, not in charge of, which assists with capital planning in Grafton. They are rewriting or attempting to rewrite their charge. Matt Often is going to be attending our meetings, and we're going to work with him to deal with CIPC input on capital. School benchmarking, I don't need to belabor the point. We've sort of been through all this stuff. However, it bears mentioning on page 12, special education. Special education is a cost driver. It is a legal and moral imperative However, we do need to make sure that we are doing it right relative to other communities before we can even begin to answer the question of, do we need to make any changes with what we're doing? So that's going to be something that we're going to be tackling as well.
Now, with special education, do they also, that's for the IEPs. What are they doing on the top end, if anything, for
There's
the,
nothing that's mandated for that at this time. And so I'll be blunt, it's at the lower levels, there's not a lot. I mean, that we do differentiated instruction. That's how we handle kids who are ahead. But we don't have a gifted program. We don't have, we don't track the kids when they're in elementary school or even in middle school, except in math. They can place into a higher math class starting in 7th grade. And that's the only time that that's when we start leveling them. But there is no money for anything for that upper 10%.
I will say, having been through this process before at Newton walked right up to special education, took a look at it, and backed off.
Really?
There is no harder, it's so hard. There's no harder topic to address. Yeah.
You have to provide, the state mandates it, you have to provide that service, and you're beholden to whatever the outcome is.
I will say that, colloquially, when I was campaigning, I heard from special education parents in the community about their complaints about how the system was run, and they felt like there were resources that weren't allocated appropriately. And then I heard from special education instructors who vociferously refuted the complaints of the very same group. So, that's something we're going to have to address. There's no way around it. There's, and to anybody out there, again, who's listening and watching, there is no greater care that we're going to take with that particular topic, I don't think. And we want everyone's input. And at the end of the day, we're going to collect the data that we collect, again, particular to benchmarking as well. And, we'll report the data as we see it. So that's it. So what I would like to do is put together for you guys an email to you, a memoranda and guideline about the topics of data collection, and then methodology, and then set a deadline for reporting this back to the committee as a whole. And before we do that, I think, and unless anybody has any other ideas, we should divide it up along municipal and school side data collection. So, does that sound okay for everybody? Okay. Can I get volunteers for school side data collection? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let me write this down. Oh, who's taking minutes? Amy, you
Me.
taking minutes? Thank you. Thank you, Amy.
You waited an hour into the meeting to ask who's taking minutes.
Listen,
Thank God Amy was here.
Well,
You prefer Pamela or Pam?
She
Pam's
announced
good.
that
Pam?
previously.
I kind of figured there would be ready-made people for the school.
you're
for
all
the
you're all
schools-
taking
for
your
the-
lives in your hands when you run this show here. You realize that, right?
school,
Like, this is
for the
going to be a
school
little
stuff.
touch and go. Okay, so can I get those hands again? So it's
Amy, Angie, Pam,
Amy.
Lindsay.
Angie, Lindsay, and Pam.
If you need another, I can jump into that one. I've always had fun with
We
that.
need more for municipal side too, so
Okay, so Muni side, give me a show of hands. I guess it's basically everybody else, right?
everybody
Okay.
else.
Okay, so that's good. We got,
My hand.
Gretchen.
Or if overlap is needed, that's fine, I'll help wherever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like doing both, so
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna stick
I'm
my
interested
nose
in
in
a few
both.
different-
yeah, and again, to the extent that anybody requires this, we're all on the same team. So, okay, so let's talk about deadlines in next meetings. So what I would like to do is today's Thursday night, so by Saturday, send out data points of collection. We'll assign towns amongst the group to speak with. I'll give you contact information for the people. It may be nothing more than, hey, here's the town clerk or the town
Are we
administrator.
gonna use the towns that are on page
So on the Muni
32.
side, we'll
Ashland,
use,
Auburn, Bellingham, Grafton, Holliston, Northborough, Oxford, Uxbridge.
yes, so on the Muni side, we'll use the DOR towns. On the educational side, for the time being, let's use the DOE's towns. Come back together with the data that we gather and see how it fits. If we need to switch lists or do it a little bit differently, we can do it that way. Also, I probably will assign each group, Westboro, Shrewsbury, Millbury, contiguous communities that we're frequently compared to for the purposes of, again, anecdotal, employment decisions that town employees make. Well, if I'm not gonna work here, then I'll go work in Millbury.
Right.
Okay, because it's, I live here, and apparently Millbury pays more or something.
Can you just repeat that small list again? Westboro, Shrewsbury,
In Millbury.
Millbury, okay.
Yes.
I thought this was simple, I wasn't sure.
I'll do the contact information, the data that we want to collect, and then let's say, and I leave this to you guys because I don't want to overburden, everybody's busy here. I don't want to overburden people. When is the next time that you want to come back together and talk about preliminary findings? I don't want to wait too long, but I don't want to have a bazillion meetings a month. So do you want to do 2 weeks?
This is fair.
So 2 weeks is the
October 3rd?
3rd?
Yeah.
What am I coming back with?
You're coming back with initial findings and your impressions based on the data points that I'll outline based on the CAG report here and the memo that I'll distribute. When we come back, I'll want to then discuss how long we think it'll take for us to come up with a report for benchmarking, and then divide us up into working groups for school cost structure, municipal cost structure, capital, and revenue, and decision-making, if that's cool.
And will we be meeting separately prior to the
Ye-
2 weeks period?
so
in terms of the school people?
You can't, there's nothing to
Right.
say you can't, and because you're a subcommittee, you don't need to abide by open meeting law. So just,
If we assign a subcommittee, they do. So we're not going to assign a subcommittee.
we're not assigning subcommittees
Not
right now. If
assigning
you want to get
subcommittees.
together with people
Have at
and
it.
chit-chat about your data,
Bunch of
Okay,
Yeah.
if you in the email just want to give us the specific data points
yes, I will.
you want us to look
Yes.
at, okay?
I was
and-
gonna suggest
and
that we set up a
compile.
Google, I have a Google folder that I can give people access to dump documents into if you want to
I
start.
hate Google Docs.
Sorry, but it's a good way to,
I hate Google Docs.
it's a good way to save on paper, and it's a good way to get all that data into one place.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Also, I
I'd
don't,
rather Microsoft Word, but Google Docs is just so inefficient. That's just my personal bias.
Feel about Google Docs.
what about
I'm
Google
shy.
Sheets?
I hate that one too. But
I also, just a housekeeping thing, we should provide, if ever we could provide Amy with your email address, because I didn't have email addresses for everybody. Sorry about that, but I called you earlier today because I didn't have your email address, and I felt really bad about it.
Sorry.
And then phone numbers as well, because it's, I'm not gonna say I'm gonna be late for every meeting, but
Anymore.
It's not working.
Jen Thomas's
It works.
complaint about me was not
We'll do it the
inaccurate.
old-fashioned way.
Frequently late. Okay, so that is the mission. We will reconvene, if it's cool with everybody, Thursday, October 3rd at 7 PM. That's okay.
Oops. FinCom starts running through.
Oh, we have a public hearing on the 3rd.
public hearing.
So Barry
Oh.
and I cannot be here on October 3rd.
Okay. I can,
As a matter of fact, we're going to be here on October 3rd.
oh, you'll be in this room. We'll be down the hall.
I will be
Okay.
in this seat.
And I'll be sitting here because this is my assigned seat.
He's got
Okay.
signed.
I have a sign. that
I knew
says
this
my
looked
assigned
familiar.
seat, yeah.
No, that's okay. I'll just, touch base with you guys individually
Okay.
and then report back to the group.
So you guys are still going to be in on the 3rd?
Yeah, I think it's
Just won't
best.
be here.
You won't be in here, we'll be in here.
Yes.
Well, if we get here first,
You don't want to fight Sue Robbins over a seat. bad.
And I know she'll be watching this. Hi,
I know. I miss FinCom. That was fun. Okay, are there any other topics on our agenda? I don't think we have meeting minutes from the last time.
We do. We didn't distribute them yet, so we
Okay.
can't vote on them.
So we can just do that next time.
So once I have everybody's emails, I can distribute the minutes.
Okay.
We do have minutes from meetings before this date, so you can read them, and then we'll vote on them at the next meeting, and you can, if you don't feel comfortable voting yes, you can just abstain. But we have not approved or submitted any minutes from this group to the town clerk as of yet.
We should at the next meeting.
We should do it at the next meeting, you're absolutely right. And I would have done it tonight if I'd thought ahead and had everybody's email addresses and sent them around, but I didn't, so.
All right. So we got an email, phone name list going around.
So you're gonna send out a Google thingy?
I can't, once I see the data points that Ed wants, I
Yeah.
can set something up. I gotta check.
And you're gonna send it to everybody but Laura.
Yeah, I mean, if Laura wants to submit her
I'm joking,
information to
Laura.
someone else and have them put it in, that's fine.
No, I can do it. I'll just be bitching all the way. If I have to have pain, you're
Hey.
gonna have pain.
Yankees suck.
There's a form on Grafton complaints for Google Docs. I think it's,
Some of
But
us,
am I, is that, I mean, how is that covered under records laws and
no,
stuff?
that's fine.
It's fine?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get in
No,
trouble.
you'll be
All right.
fine.
If I get in trouble, I'm sending them to
Yeah,
you.
you can
The
tell.
one thing that we can never
The state
do
knows where to find me.
is deliberate
Right,
over email,
right.
ever.
Well, I think that's a good point for everybody who's here, that, you know, we
Oh,
can't
sure.
discuss online or in email or in person the work of this committee outside of this committee.
Right.
There are ethics laws around that I myself just learned
And
this
open
year.
meeting laws.
And open meeting law. So if you aren't familiar with open meeting law, I definitely recommend you go Google it, Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, check it out. I think there's a quiz you can take.
There is a quiz. It has a lot to do with how many gift cards that you can accept as somebody who's. So I never gotten any gift cards. I don't know who all these people are that are
I
getting gift
accept
cards.
Target gift
I've
cards
never
in small
received a
increments.
gift card from
there can
anybody.
be no meetings in the Grafton pub or any of the other certain
So they
related
tell me.
As long
pubs.
as you're not a
Can't be
subcommittee.
any.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can, no, and in all seriousness, you can discuss amongst yourselves the topics that are going on here. What you can't do is, within enough members of the group to create a quorum, deliberate
Right.
and make a decision outside of here. Where it gets a little bit hazier is whether or not you two can say, hey, you know, here's what I think. And then Amy comes to me and I say to these guys, oh, here's what they think. You know, don't do that.
That's serial deliberation.
Just don't do that. There are certainly enough people to talk to in the community about what's going to be, talked about and decided here over the next few months, that we don't need to do it just with ourselves. So,
One other thing, we didn't really have an official agenda this week, but I expect we will in the future.
Yes.
One thing we had put off till this week was we had mentioned at our previous meeting, some sort of online presence for the committee.
yes,
We talked about a Facebook page.
Yeah,
I mean, again, we can't deliberate on that. We can answer questions, but we can't discuss, so it gets really tricky. Is that something you want me to set up?
so what I would like
Way
to
to
do
wait.
actually, let's wait on that because I want to talk to Tim about maybe making that part of the town website where when we post our reports, and our work plans, that the public can access those directly and see what we're doing. I'm not sure Facebook is the best.
I agree. I think we talked about it when we kind of were like, yeah, that'd be great. And then the more I thought about it, I just feel like the temptation to discuss, to
Yeah.
defend is going to be
Yeah.
a little bit too great.
I think other people are going to take that upon themselves to do that for us.
Well, Facebook is a social site.
Right,
and
not an
So it's like all
information,
bets
yeah.
are off, and the minute you go on there, it's like, and they're off.
Right.
You know, people don't have a filter there.
It's going to turn into Grafton Complaints.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Experience has shown that
Hate
it is
that.
better to stay away from answering anything on,
So yeah, let's,
Any of those
I do want to, I want people to be able to access our information directly as soon as we have it. So I'll talk to Tim about maybe see if we can peel off a page on the town website to post our work plans, our draft reports, our full reports, and maybe committee meeting minutes also. So let's do it like that.
Can you throw the towns you want me to cover at me? Because what I'll
Yes.
immediately do is wander over to their town website and start grabbing information.
Yes. That'll be part of the memo I send
I'll
out.
give you 8 towns, I have a list for you.
Give me till Saturday morning on that, because
Well,
I
to
think
give you an
tomorrow.
idea, I had a lot of fun looking up Holland. There's a fascinating town to look at.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
don't-
not the country.
No.
Okay.
They don't have a town administrator.
No.
Their
There's
Board of
3 people that
Selectmen,
live in Holland.
36. Their Board of Selectmen, how dare they, their Select Board runs the town.
Yes.
Fascinating.
We used to do that.
And the other town is Dennis. If you want to see a low property tax rate,
Yeah.
you look at Dennis.
Yeah.
And the magic of Dennis, we should do this here. You know, we have a beach with water, is they have all of that seasonal housing, hundreds and hundreds of those houses. They pay full property taxes. In fact, they pay more on their tax rate
Because they're by the
than the
water.
people who live there year-round.
Yeah.
Now, their houses, even though it's a little thing, their prices, their house prices, of course, match what we pay here
Right.
because they're near the water.
That's right.
But their property tax is like $2 and something
Whoa.
That's
per
interesting.
assessed value of 1,000.
Right.
Because they have so many, and none of those seasonal houses put kids in the schools.
That's right.
And there's nobody there, so the police don't need to really patrol and all that. It's
Fascinating.
fascinating.
It really is.
I was wondering about Medway for comparison, like how.
Medway's a good one. Middleborough, it turns out, is another really good
Hmm.
one, for whatever reason.
Not
Yeah.
Webster.
Yeah. Not Webster.
No.
Nope. So anyway, on a personal note, I am so happy to be surrounded by fellow, and don't take this the wrong way, municipal dorks who are willing to take time out of their lives to come in and talk about this stuff. I
Did you
find
just
this
call us dorks?
municipal dorks. It's a term of affection.
Amy, can you add that to the minutes?
Yes,
No,
it's it really does. Most people.
Money. Than a dork.
Most people will not take their time out of their days to come do this
Better.
sort of thing and
Nerd.
really peel the onion back
That's fine.
and dig into the weeds. Thank you all for doing it. I really do appreciate it. It is going to be a fascinating few months.
Took you a
Thank
long
you all
time
for your
to get us
service.
here. So
It did. And thank you so much for being here. I really
Well,
do.
no, you have to be invested
You do.
in what's going on in your community, because if you're not, then you have no excuses if it
That's
all
right.
goes south,
That's right.
okay? And thank God that we live in a community where we have the ability to have input. Again, I grew up in Queens, New York. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
No input.
Which is part of New York City. The town I grew up in was 18,000 people, okay, squeezed in, it's a peninsula, right across the bay from LaGuardia Airport, okay, and the Bronx and Rikers Island. And it was a mile and a half by a mile and a half. It was a very rural town that was sort of like backwater, everybody forgot about it. Then all of a sudden, people found it, but it was like a dumping ground. They put in the waste treatment plant for all of northeast Queens. Now, thanks to Mayor de Blasio, they want to close LaGuardia, they want to close Rikers Island and put in four small prisons in all of the 5 boroughs. And to turn the tide against homelessness in the 5 boroughs, you know what they're doing? With no input from the communities, these idiot politicians, I'm not kidding.
love
This
you
is not
so
funny.
much.
It is so venal, it's not funny. They have these nonprofit, and I say this quote unquote, because it's not nonprofit corporations. They're all tied to the venal, corrupt politicians, they get money to house, they're building, transitional shelters. People coming right out, hardened criminals, coming right out of the worst prisons in the state.
Rikers.
Not just Rikers, no, we're talking like Attica, okay? They're putting in these transitional shelters in the middle-class neighborhoods, converted factories, things like this. The community has no input. You're thinking it's an old factory building or a warehouse. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, it's a 200 or a 400-bed facility for mentally ill people. So 4 blocks from where I grew up, now they put in one of these facilities. It's supposed to open. They said it was going to be like a factory or commercial building. All of a sudden, the community finds out it's going to be a 250-bed shelter, transitional housing for all men, and it's within, you ready for this? It's within a quarter of a mile of all the schools in the area, and it's going to be housing murderers, rapists, including my old all-girls Catholic high school. Talk about a target-rich environment. So the communities try and fight these things. They don't find out that it's going to be what it is until the last minute. And it's incredible.
But what are the property tax rates?
What happened was, my parents' house. That's awesome. Okay, my parents' house, if they were still there, which they paid $16,000 for in 1960.
Wow.
It's now worth, if it were still there, okay, would be worth over $1 million. The property taxes have gone sky
So,
high.
hold on. Wait. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. All right. All in favor?
Recorded.
Yeah.
All right.